We're live. Check, 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 check. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Looks like I'm all good here. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to see you. It's been a little while. My name is Dustin Cormier, and this is How to Rock Astrology. I believe I have some folks hanging out with me already. Hello, Susie. Hello, Gunmetal Crow. Let me know if you guys can hear me okay, if the audio is coming through. I am finally back at my place. I've been just doing a whole bunch of traveling around. I went to Florida last week, which was a lot of fun. Wild times in Florida, let me tell you. Thank you, Susie. Thank you so much. And I'm glad to be back hanging out with everybody here. I think I intended to throw this guy on. Glad to be back in my usual thing that I love to do. Now, today is a very special episode for me, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Gunmetal Crow. I don't know if anybody knows this, but of course, your host, your oh-so-seductive, intense, sensual, sexual, magnetic host, myself, my ascendant is in Ashlesha. So, of course, we love to talk about how pretty we are and stuff like that. Nah, I'm just kidding. I'm only half serious. My ascendant is Ashlesha. And so, as I usually say, it's important for people to dig that when you're talking about your own sign, it's easy to get into like a biased idea of it. There's so much going on with myself, with Dustin Cormier, that has nothing to do with Ashlesha. So, that being the case, it often happens that, if I say, oh, I relate to Ashlesha this way, it might not be straight, full Ashlesha. So this is always something good to keep in mind when I talk about myself and my own sign. But one of the reasons that I do these videos is because you're not just hearing it from me, you're also going to be hearing it from 3 different sources. I would say, really, the Taittiriya Brahmana is the main source. That's where Vic Dicara and Ernst Wilhelm get their information from. That's these 2 books here. And as well, we're also going to hear it from various texts, Vedic texts, that have come throughout history, talking about the story of the deity of the sign in question. Today, we're talking about Ashlesha. The deity of Ashlesha is known as the Naga. They are these beautiful, big, large-eyed, serpentine intermediaries between the underworld and the divine world above us. They are considered to be, a lot of people correlates these guys, the Naga, people correlate them with the Asuras. The Asuras, there are other Asuras other than just the Naga. But the Naga are considered the dragons, the serpentine people, who again represent the subconscious. These folks, this consciousness, is a tantric consciousness, essentially. And it's been rather demonized. What it pretends to is sort of demonized in Judaic, Abrahamic, and Islamic philosophical spirituality. So that's like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These folks would generally consider the Naga to represent the figure of Satan, the figure of the senses, sort of distorting our divine love for all things due to an attachment to specific things on planet Earth. We all can get attached to the things we love on planet Earth. But the Vedic people have a very open mind towards what exactly it means to be engaged with the material world. And this is the tradition that really Tantra comes from. But as we can see, Tantra is really only thousands of years old, 1,500 years old. But the basic philosophical epithet of Tantra, the roots of Tantra, go back 3,000 years plus to when this text was written, the Taittiriya Brahmana, and even before it. Tantra being the engagement with material. So that's going to be a big part of what this sign is all about. When we hear about the seduction, when we hear about the power that comes from involving yourselves in an attractive and seductive way with things in the material world, with people in the material world, with beauty, with luxury, with gems and jewels, and all of these things, we're going to hear that they can be a vessel for the divine if used correctly. And that is the long and short of it. And if you choose not to take advantage of such things, you don't have to. And the people of the Abrahamic and Islamic and Judaic traditions don't necessarily have to. They do fine with the type of worship that they have. But we're going to talk about today Ashlesha and how this relates to Tantra, to engaging with the material as a vessel for the divine, seeing it objectively as such. So let's get into it today. That's my little intro. It's nice to see everybody. Hello, I see you've got Venus in Ashlesha. It's nice to see. If you guys, this is a live stream, feel free to let me know, what signs, what planets you've got going on in this sign. It's always nice to see how different people are experiencing the energy that we're talking about today. So, today, our main shtick, first things first, we're going to go through the usual stuff that I like to go through, which is our reading coming from my prepared introduction. Oh, Gunmetal Crow is also Ashlesha rising. IC has Rahu and Venus conjunct in Ashlesha. That is a juicy energy. We're going to talk about how anyone with any interaction with Ashlesha is going to involve themselves, for better and for worse, in seduction and attraction and, just having an enjoyable personality. In the extreme, Ashlesha can be too attached to the power that it can get from an attractive personality, as well as the attraction to the attractive personality of others. Now, we have a question here. Julia Ludens has asked, do you use Vic's system to define degrees of nakshatra? This person is saying that they remember Ernst and Dicara's system differ in defining nakshatra boundaries, and there's an upside-down smiley face. I hate to say it, my friend, but you are correct. And it's not something that I have found much closure on. What I've done is I've made a list, and we're going to show it at some point here, but it's essentially this for Julia. This is a picture of the different ayanamshas that Vic and Ernst have kind of come up with. I don't know why this thing is here. Oh, come on. What the heck is this? Oh, shucks. This has never been here before. You'll have to excuse me here, folks. What is happening here, man? Well, anyway, I guess I'm going to have to figure it out. Okay, good. Got it. So this is a picture of Vic Dicara's ayanamsha, and then this is a picture of Ernst's ayanamsha. So we're going to mention this again anyway, but, Vic mentions his is pretty much Lahiri ayanamsha. And Ashlesha for him begins around 10 degrees 47 minutes of arc of Leo. For Ernst, Ashlesha begins around 3 degrees of Leo. That is a very large difference. We're going to talk about that when we kind of get there, but essentially they are different, and I'm going to be doing videos eventually just interviewing Ernst and asking what is happening with the wide gap there, because it's a huge gap. It's 7 degrees. It's a whole not a nakshatra, but it's a whole lot, let's say. So it's an annoying fact, Julia, that it'd be hard for me to say which is which. Often with nakshatras, Vic has taught me that if you can't get an exact idea of a person's nakshatra, just talk about something else. There's plenty of other things to talk about in an astrology chart that would give you good due course to talk about. It's better to talk about the things that you do know for sure, rather than leading someone on, I'm just assuming this person's got a Ashlesha Nakshatra on their ascendant, and then you find that you're wrong and you send this person on the wrong route, or you send yourself on the wrong route. Now, for example, I myself have Leo at about 13 degrees. So in both of Ernst's as well as Vic's system, there's a little in-between slot. It's basically between 10 degrees and 16 degrees of Leo, where any planet or ascendant or cusp is probably for sure in Ashlesha. I'm going to mention that again as we go along. Therese, it'd be hard to say if your moon is in Ashlesha. Your moon is at 3 degrees Leo. According to Ernst, you're probably almost in Ashlesha, but I'd feel safer if you were close to 10 degrees. That's where a safer place for me to call someone Ashlesha. So we'll mention a little bit more about this again, but for now, folks, I've got an intro that I usually like to do. Hello, Marcella Ramonet. Nice to see you hanging out with me live. And Susie made a great point here. Susie Underwood has said that talking with Ernst and Vic would be a great interview to learning the reasoning behind these differences. God, if I could get them both in an interview to talk about that, wouldn't that be wild? I'm going to work it out, folks. I'm going to see what I can do there. Until then, we are just going to have to abide by the gap that we have. Now let's start going and digging into our introduction here, folks. This is my 27 Nakshatra series. In my practice, I use 12 tropical signs because I'm a tropical Vedic astrologer. And I overlay the 12 tropical signs on the 27 lunar nakshatras, which are star-based. If you watch some of my videos, including my Age of Aquarius video, where I do a good job talking about the sidereal tropical debate, you can learn a little bit about the difference between the tropical zodiac, which is based on the calendar, and the sidereal nakshatras, which are based on the stars. Feel free to ask any questions about it. I've done lots in other videos describing it. But essentially, how it's often described is through Vishnu's 3 steps. Vishnu had to step a demon. The demon is called the ego. And the ego thought he was the Lord of all things. And Vishnu comes along and says, I don't think so, pal. There's something bigger than you happening here. And so Vishnu says, if you could, Mr. Ego, Mr. Demon, just give me 3 little tiny steps. And the demon, and Vishnu came to him as a midget, an atom, a single point of space. That's the midget. So the demon says, you're going to ask me for 3 steps? I own the whole cosmos, said the ego. You silly little fool, you can have your 3 steps. And Vishnu says, okay, great. With my first step, I'm going to take the stars. This is the sidereal nakshatras. With my second step, I'm going to take local space, and that's the tropical zodiac, which spins along the background of the stars. With my third step, I'm going to take geomantic space, which is the natal which is the houses, essentially. And it's at this point that the ego recognized that Vishnu, that this midget is none other than Vishnu, the true god of the universe, and that the ego is actually nothing in comparison to the framework of mathematical beauty and wisdom that the cosmos represents outside of our individual bubble of perception. Beautiful story. So in this series, I convey the, I've got an introduction. If anybody's interested, I have an introductory video where I go into that in more detail, that little story. And I talk about what I'm doing here. Essentially, this series, the 27 Nakshatras series, I'm kind of trying to talk about the Nakshatras not being married to the signs. Many traditional astrologers in the Jyotish tradition, because they're sidereal astrologers, they assume that the nakshatras are married to the signs, and that there's even a connection related to the navamsha, where essentially they think that every nakshatra is 4 navamshas long. It's 13 and 20 degrees, so Ashwini, they say, always starts at 0 degrees Aries. But this doesn't make sense to a tropical astrologer, because 0 degrees Aries moves along the background of the stars. So in this series, we're discussing what is the nakshatra essence when it is not married to a certain sign. This is the tropical tradition of conveying nakshatras. Hopefully I did that little intro justice. So the most, maybe I'll just do a quick little peek and see if we have any relevant questions. The moon at 26 degrees of Sagittarius. Okay, very good. So, the most authentic and undistorted literature we have on the nakshatras, according to us in the tropical tradition, this comes from the Taittiriya Brahmana. A Brahmana is a commentary on the Vedas. So the Taittiriya Brahmana is a commentary on the Krishna Yajurveda, and it's kind of considered almost to be a continuation of it. This is Vedic era literature. It's not written by the people necessarily who wrote the Vedas. The Krishna Yajurveda is even more pure. But this is a text that all of us, many people are pointing to, even people in the traditional Jyotish tradition, the sidereal tradition, will point to the Taittiriya Brahmana and its 27 asterisms as very consolidating pictures of what the nakshatras are all about. So I could give again, we talk about more of this in my intro, but just to give an idea of some of the distortion that has happened to the nakshatras that we're trying to disseminate. It's twofold. One of them is incorrect zodiac associations with the nakshatras, and that's due to the sidereal tropical debate. That's, like I said, again, everyone thinks Ashwini has to start at 0 degrees Aries. Everyone thinks that Magha has to start at around 0 degrees of Leo, because it's the throne. Everyone thinks Jesta has to be in Scorpio because that's where the moon is debilitated. But now in tropical days, Jesta falls into Sagittarius, tropical Sagittarius. So where people think Jesta is always jealous, and Jesta is jealous, but they think Jesta is jealous because it falls in Scorpio. But that, as the tropical people say, is a quality that has nothing to do with the sign that Jesta falls into, because the nakshatras are always revolving against the signs. So we're undoing these types of distortions in this video, in this series. Now there's also the Vimshotari Lord thing. It's the planet that rules the first dasha period when the moon falls in that nakshatra. For example, in the case of Ashlesha, if the moon falls in Ashlesha, that means that the first dasha that you're going to experience in this planet is going to be Mercury dasha. Therefore, in the old tradition, Ashlesha is considered to have the qualities of Mercury. it's still something that I have to work through in my head. But I'm following Vic Dicara's lead here in trying to define and describe the nakshatra Ashlesha without the association of Mercury. Because the Vimshotri dashas are something that was created long after the Taittiriya Brahmana. The Taittiriya Brahmana that we're getting our source from is much older than horoscope astrology. Horoscope astrology is something that began around like 1000 BC at the very earliest, but probably closer to like 500 BC is when the natal horoscope began to be conveyed. But the Taittiriya Brahmana has been around for 3,000 years. It was probably written around 2000 BC or even 3000 BC, probably around 2000 BC. So the nakshatras, through texts like this, have been praised for their qualities long before the natal horoscope existed. So this is why to say Ashlesha has Mercury qualities is possibly a distortion, and that's why we're running through it here, right? So again, just to give this short thrift, once again, we have Vic Dicara's Ayanamsha and Ernst's Ayanamsha. Now, to give an example of how we can be for sure about this, Vic says that Ashlesha starts around 10 degrees 47 minutes of Leo. According to Ernst, and this is only one of Ernst's Ayanamshas. I've even recently, it's very confusing and I got to work it out. But there is another Ayanamsha that Ernst uses that's a little bit even different from this. But the Dhruva equatorial longitude galactic center Mula Ayanamsha, Ernst gives it as Ashlesha starting at 3 degrees 27 minutes of arc in Leo. So generally, if your sign or your cusp or whatever falls especially in between 10 degrees and 16 degrees of Leo, then you've probably for sure got an Ashlesha placement there. If it's not in between 10 degrees and 16 degrees, then you have to really be careful and discerning about feeling out where that planet is. For certain people, it should be easier. For example, if your ascendant lord falls at about 7 degrees of Ashlesha, and you really feel like you've got Ashlesha going on, then that might be the case. It might be easier to see because it's your ascendant lord. And this is important work for us to do these days, folks. Everyone who uses their feelings to describe and feel out their ascendant lord in a certain placement is going to help us get clearer on how these nakshatras are operating. It's frustrating, but this is what we have to do in an age where we are kind of on a cutting edge, an evolving edge of uncovering a very ancient paradigm of astrology. It's very important, and this is the work we have to do here, folks. I'm lucky because my ascendant falls at about 13 degrees of Leo. So that works in Ernst's system as well as Vic Dicara's system. So between 10 and 16 degrees of Leo, you're probably got an Ashlesha placement there. Pretty well for sure, I'd say. As I've talked about, this is it's frustrating between Vic and Ernst's system because there's a gap. Like Ernst calculates his in a different way. You notice Kritika is at about 20 degrees for Vic, and it's at about 19, pretty much 20 degrees for Ernst as well. But when we look at Magha, there's a wide gap. Vic says Magha's at 24 degrees Leo. Ernst says Magha's at 16 degrees Leo. So that's like 8 degrees difference, and that's the widest gap. So the two of them are just calculating these in different ways. Like I've said, there will be a point eventually where I'm going to interview Ernst and Vic and work through that. IC has asked if I've ever looked into the 28 Arabic lunar mansions. That's interesting. Vedic astrology, the original nakshatras consider that there was a 28th nakshatra called Abhijit. And there are certain systems of Vedic astrology that discuss using the 28 instead of the 27 nakshatra system. Abhijit is a whole other nakshatra that people will describe and discuss. But there's only 27 in the Taittiriya Brahmana. So some say the 28 is used for certain, like prajna and like mundane astrology, as well as Sarvato Bhadra Chakra, I believe it's called, which is a whole other astrology system. But for most people, at least in this tradition, we go by the 27 nakshatras of the Taittiriya Brahmana. Another debated thing that is being worked out. But I imagine that the 28 or Arabic lunar mansions is similar to the 28 nakshatras, including Abhijit. So that was a long intro, as usual, folks. Let's start getting into the qualities of Ashlesha. I'm starting to think that I should be less long-winded when I do these intros. But it is what it is. I guess it warms me up. But I'm going to think about that and maybe starting to just dive into the character qualities of the nakshatras more when I do these videos. So, there are 4 classical nakshatra characteristics that are often given for the nakshatras. I think there's probably more than 4, but these are the ones that I have been typically can be sure about. And again, you can look at the intro to this series to understand why I chose these 4. So these are not given in the Taittiriya Brahmana. So these are probably culled by people who have read the ancient texts and have grouped the nakshatras in these ways. Some of them are mathematical, like for example, the activity as well as the kingdom. These are mathematically based. With the kingdom, it just goes Jiva, Mula, Dhatu. Jiva, Mula, Dhatu. Jiva, Mula, Dhatu. Animal, plant, mineral. The nakshatras just go like that. It's like almost like in the Zodiac, we have cardinal, fixed, mutable. Cardinal, fixed, mutable. This is a similar thing to the nakshatra system. We also have these 7 qualities, as well as the sexual yoni animal, which is very important in traditional Indian marriage assessment. And that's a whole world in itself that I'll eventually be diving into, because it's a great, wonderful world to dig into. If you know your moon nakshatra, it can be very interesting to read about its yoni energy and how it relates to your sexual energy, especially if you're in Ashlesha like me. But it's not that important for everybody, I guess. So as we read, we see that the quality of Ashlesha is known as tikshna. It's also daruna. So tikshna means sharp, dreadful. It's a cutting, intense energy. And it can also be daruna, which is kind of hard. So the nakshatras that share these qualities are the following 4. And we could see these being amongst the toughest. These are the toughest nakshatras that we have out there. Ardra, which we've already talked about as being Shiva, a very powerful and destructive, possibly destructive nakshatra. Ashlesha, of course. We have Jesta as well. That's Indra. That can be very sharp and dreadful. As well as Mula, the dog nakshatra. Ardra is the other dog nakshatra. Of course, Ardra and Mula can be best friends because they're the male and female dog. I'm not sure what the other... I should have checked this out to check what the other female cat nakshatra... I think it's Anuradha. I'd have to look it up. But in any case, these are the 4 nakshatras that have a similar grouping, and that's Tikshna, sharp and dreadful. So there is a mutual grouping here. And 3 of these are Jiva nakshatras. Ardra, Ashlesha, and Jesta are all Jiva nakshatras. It's only Mula that contains the Dhatu, the mineral phase. To give a little bit of understanding of the animal, of the Jiva quality, Ernst Wilhelm does a great little, he's got a new Rashi's course, a new signs course, where he talks about all the signs. And while he's describing them, he uses Jiva, Mula, well, he goes Dhatu, Mula, and Jiva. So Dhatu relates to the cardinal signs. The cardinal signs are always digging into actual material things. So if you've got strong placements in a Dhatu sign, which is Aries, Cancer, Capricorn, and Libra, you're always digging into material things, actually getting into like fixing a car, and then putting a lot of energy invested into a car or an actual physical business. The Mula people, which are the plant people, have a little bit more of their in-between. They work a lot on cars, but they're also strongly affected by people. And they use people to help their material affairs, and they use the material as a basis for dealing with their human affairs. It's the jivas, such as Ashlesha, that is very interested in psychology. They're very sensitive and psychically sensitive to how people operate. And, you know, when you think about it, there's 27 nakshatras and only 3 of these types. So that means about 9. There's probably 9 nakshatras that are of the jiva quality. And of these 9, 3 of them are tikshna, ardra, ashlesha, and jesta, right? So Ashlesha is like the mutable signs. It's a constantly improving what it does through trying it out with other people. And it can be an entertainer. It's the human world that Ashlesha gets into. It's why it can be so good at dealing with the masses and hypnotizing, because it has such a sense of the self in one, which is the self in all, the psychology of all humanity. And it can be very playful and even manipulative with people. You know, most people are of the Dhatu quality, really. Most people are just dealing with their business, and that's where their mind is at. They kind of mind their own affairs, and they don't get their hands too much into other people's pots. The plant people, the Mula people, will get their hands into other people's pots. They'll involve themselves with other people if it serves their material interest. Jiva people, like Ashlesha, they just like to put their hand in other people's pots. They just like to engage with people, to become entwined with them, to affect them, to be able to just, you know, hey, I'm doing this thing and I need you, or I'd like to be on call for you when you need something. It can be a positive thing, of course. It's, you know, all of them can be positive and negative if you understand it in this way. Thank you, IC. IC's mentioned that you love the long intros. Gunmetal Crow has mentioned that Ashlesha can be jealous as well as Jesta can. And this is part of the reason, you know, this is part of what's being described through Ashlesha being a Jiva Nakshatra, is that it can't take its mind off of what other humans are doing. Just like Jesta. It levels itself out through all the humanity around it. You know, when somebody's got a business, the numbers of the business is how they convey their success. That's Dhatu. I'm getting more productivity than I did last year. That's a success for Dhatu. Mula is the same, which is the plant people, but Jiva is paying attention to what other people are doing and their success, and watching if someone else gets successful. Ashlesha thinks, why am I not as successful as that person? Why don't I have going on? What do they have that could help me to get better? So they are paying attention to what other people are doing, and that's part of the jealousy that can happen with Ashlesha. If, you know, left to extremes, if that makes sense, you know. All right. So let's start digging into the sutra structure of the Taittiriya Brahmana here. This is the guts of the show here, folks. When we read about we're going to read what Ashlesha is coming from the Taittiriya Brahmana. The true nakshatra name is going to be up top, which is, of course, Ashlesha. The pink letters shows the deity, which rules the nakshatra in classic Vedic literature. The letters in white is the name of the nakshatra. Sometimes obscure names are used to give more information because, of course, it's the case where these sutras coming from the Taittiriya Brahmana are meant to be a condensed picture of the essence of the nakshatra. This was written 3,000 years ago when paper was scarce. They hardly even wrote. So what they would do is the brilliant Vedic rishis would just be in such a place of self-realization. They would see themselves. They would see how the nakshatras relate to their own energy, because the self in one is the self in all. They were undistorted by modern... They weren't watching Degrassi. They weren't paying attention to anything outside of their own energy field and nervous system. So they could spend a lot of time digesting and discussing the energies that move through us, and this includes the nakshatras. So what they wanted to do was, for the sake of themselves, to maintain a memory of what these energies are, but also to make sure that the followers were in alignment with the understandings of the rishis. There was no paper at the time. So if they're going to make something that they can talk about the nakshatras with, they're going to want to make it poetic. They're going to want to cram a lot of information into the lyrical rhythm of the sutra. So each of these sutras is created the same way, with these same 6 figures. There's 6 figures in each of these sutras, and sometimes they'll use a certain word that's very when you hear it, when you understand what the word means, you think, wow. It's amazing that they use that word to just define the energy of the nakshatra. Now, there's a foundation above. That's what's needed for the nakshatra to function properly. And this is always suffixed by the word parastat. That's the above, para, above. So we've got the foundation above, which is what's needed, and then the foundation below, which is what is produced when it receives what it needs. Now, usually what this means is there's a negative and positive connotation to how each of these can be expressed. What is needed can be done in a bad or a good way, and what is produced can be done in a bad or a good way. This is just the nature of the nakshatras. We're going to see what that means as we come along. So now it is time to get into the Taittiriya Brahmana text. Let's have a good time and get into some Sanskrit, which I so very much love to do. Now, there are two, of course you can see that I've got the basic reading here. We're going to have Ernst Wilhelm's translation of it, which is very brass. It's sort of like more about the translation than keeping to the essence. In my opinion, Vic Dicara has done a better job of translating these, and so we're going to read Vic Dicara's overall picture of what this is supposed to mean after we read it from Ernst. Ernst did these, his translations quite a long time ago. I think it was about 6 or 8 years ago, possibly 10 years ago, something like that. Whereas Vic's translations are about 4 years old. So Vic has done a lot more work in this particular regard because Ernst has just been busy doing other things. He's a wizard of his own sort. So hopefully you guys can see me here. Yeah, you can. Let's start moving through. This is a weird one. This is a long one. I was practicing it yesterday to try to get it. I'm pretty sure that there's a ch sound in the ch. I should have checked Vic's recording to make sure of it. Vic Dicara has a recording on his YouTube, I believe, and his website, of all of the Nakshatra Sutras coming from Taittiriya Brahmana, in case anybody wants to really get it for sure right. This is the only time I felt the need to say that there's a specific bit. It's the CH here that's tricky. So, we have Ashlesha. The Taittiriya Sutra reads, Sarpanam Ashlesha Abhyagachahanta Parastad Abhyanrityanto Vastat Sarpanam Ashlesha Abhyagachahanta. It's the H I've got to get right. Abhyagachantaha Parastad Abhyagachantaha Parastad Abhyanrityanto Avastat. I'm going to do it one more time. Sarpanam Ashlesha Abhyagachantaha Parastad Abhyanrityanto Avastat. When there's a dot underneath an H, you make a H sound. Ashlesha Abhyagachantaha Parastad. And then you'll also notice there's a dot underneath the R. Whenever you see a dot underneath an R in Sanskrit, it's going to be a re. Abhyanrit, right? Abhyanrityanto Vastat. Somebody's making some funny noises in my house right now. So that is how we say it, folks. I hope that I did the trick there with reading that. Yes, and Susie's noted Vic's videos have the sung versions. Yeah, it is on his YouTube channel. Thank you, Susie. So if you want to hear a better version of this, you can hear it on Vic's YouTube channel. All of his videos, his newest series talking about the nakshatras, he'll go through the full Taittiriya Brahmana Sutra in the way that he does it. Nonetheless, let's start working through the terms here. Sarpanam is plural, and so this is Ernst Wilhelm's translation. Sarpanam being plural, it means of the serpents. Ashlesha is also plural, it's embraces. So we've got the embraces of the serpents. Now, Abhyagachantaha, Ernst describes this as approaching indirectly. And this is already we're beginning to build a picture of the trickiness of Ashlesha. It's like what Ashlesha is building on here is, embracing somebody, getting together with somebody can be intense. It can almost be too intense sometimes to feel like you've been sucked into someone else's energy, especially an attractive and powerful person. Everybody feels it's like you're being wrapped up by a snake. The trick of Ashlesha is to be indirect about having snared somebody. And this can be a positive thing. This is like the mystique of a lover who doesn't give away the show that, if I go to talk to a girl and I just say, "Oh, hi there, I'm very attracted to you. You seem like you're very attracted to me. Would you like to embrace each other?" It never happens like that. It's a sidewinding enterprise. And it's the same thing with anybody in big business. When somebody's got a big business thing that they've got going on, they don't want to show all their cards right away, but they can show that they are willing to engage in this approaching indirectly. This is what we're starting to build a picture of with Ashlesha. Abhyagachantaha is approaching indirectly, and we're going to go more into this word when we read Vic's translation. But what we see is that abhi means to reach, to join, or to come to. And agachantaha kind of means not going. So it's ironic that abhi means to come to, and agachantaha means not going. Together, we get the picture that a person is coming to something without necessarily looking like that's where they're going. Now, abhyanrityantaha kind of means indirectly dancing towards. So they almost mean the same thing, but they are a little bit different. Again, Ernst's translation is brass. It becomes more clear when we get to Vic's, but let's first get the total picture of what Ernst has put down here. The embraces of the serpents are approaching indirectly from above. It's through approaching indirectly that they indirectly dance towards something from below. And dancing it's an expression of joy. It's an expression of ecstasy for the self, really. One dancing joyfully towards their own enjoyment. Dancing is something you really do for yourself. And the dancing that we do, that we're moving towards, the joy that we're experiencing, is for an object outside of ourselves. That object, again, can be the vessel for our own self-ecstasy. But what we see here is a very tantric depiction of how dancing towards an object brings a certain type of ecstasy. And especially the Vedic way of going about that is by being indirect. This is a very tantric phrase that is happening here, if you understand it correctly. When the Vedic people, because all the Vedic people are about not being attached to anything. So if you're going to be dancing towards something that brings you self-joy and self-ecstasy, your word is your manifestation. So if you say, I love you, I love this thing, I want this thing, that's what you're manifesting, but that's not approaching indirectly. The tantric way is to dance towards that object which brings you ecstasy, but not necessarily claiming that this thing is something that I'm attached to. Or that you're even moving towards that thing. It's like you're moving towards the watering hole and you're dancing the whole time, and everyone just thinks that you're in your own ecstasy. And you go in, you dip your hand in, you drink the water, and that was all part of what this person's doing. Meanwhile, your mission was to get the water and to thirst yourself and to get that deliciousness. And then you move on to something else. But you're never going to say, I'm going to get some water. That's where my brain is going to describe this anyway. But it's a very tantric depiction being described here. A very tantric phrase being described. Let's dig a little bit further to see how Vic Dicara unfolds this consciousness of how the tantra of deeply engaging with something, but always being indirect, always being unattached within even the greatest depths of enchantment and engagement. The word is indirect. Sarpana is serpents. Ashlesha is embrace. Not much difference there. Now, where the difference comes in between Ernst and Vic is the Padastat and Avastat. Vic reads, Abhi agachantaha. And of course, Abhi is where the Abhya, when we read Abhya gachantaha, the Abhya is, the root of it is Abhi. It's the same thing with Abhyanritanto. The Abhi is the root, or the prefix, really. Abhyagachantaha, we read it's an enchanting attractions, seductions. And it's as if the other person is enchanted by me. even though I'm actually the one going towards the object, this way the object is coming towards me. And there is an engagement there. There's a tantric object that I'm seeking, but instead of me going towards it, I'm bringing it to me. And there's a power play there, especially if two serpents are embracing each other. When two humans come together, Ashlesha is in effect, because they both are applying the serpent's embrace to each other. They both want each other, but they're both acting as vessels for the divine love and ecstasy desired from within themselves. So what's needed, the above, is enchanting attractions and seductions. And this is what produces abhyanricyanto, which is enchanting dances. And of course, we know this kind of describes that if Ashlesha is not going well, there's an intense attachment to being sexual, to being magnetic, to being magnetized from and towards other people or another person. This can be a very lonesome, loneliness-producing nakshatra. This can be a nakshatra that gives the feeling that I will never be good enough to attract anybody when things go wrong in this nakshatra. Even though you could be. There's somebody here who mentioned, I don't want to get too specific into anybody's thing. So IC mentioned that you've got Rahu and Venus here. Because it's in Leo, I would encourage you to consider that there's probably a lot of times for someone with that particular position of Rahu and Venus in Ashlesha in Leo to make sure that you are objective and treat your emotions objectively with regards to the attachments that you have in the magnetism that you experience between yourself and other people. Don't ignore them completely if they're frustrating, because Rahu, it wants to open towards wherever it is. So Rahu, being with Venus in Ashlesha, wants to experience what the tantra of this magnetism is all about. Because it's so new, because that's what Rahu represents, Ketu would be opposite, and that's the past life. So Rahu is where you want to go. It's a place that you want to learn. Because it's so new for a person with Rahu and Ashlesha, they're going to get burned. It's like somebody who spent 40 years as being like a virgin, or a person who's never really delighted in engaging with anybody because they were hanging on Ketu and Aquarius the whole time. They're more busy being a lovely community person. Somebody who's, Ketu and Aquarius. So it's like somebody who does things for the community, who doesn't do things for their own specific sense of taste. Now they have Rahu and Ashlesha. Somewhere along the lines, they've been ignoring the desire to be the lion, to be the one that stands out and shines amidst their community. Now, one day, someone decides to just bring them along. Let's go and have a little drink at a bar and let's dance. And you dance and you find that somebody is attracted to you. And now you feel and experience that, and it's amazing. It's just this kaikion. It's this drink of this magnetism you've never experienced before, but you've always wanted to. But it was just a quick thing. Person said hi, and you were like, hi, and you grabbed onto them because it was so probably good for you to feel that way. But now you're attached, and the person feels it, and they're like, whoa, sorry, I didn't mean to be so engaged. I didn't mean to have such an attraction here. And now there's this giant hole, this rift in the Rahu and Ashlesha person, because I had this thing. I felt like I stuck out. I was this magnetic, beautiful thing that I've always wanted to be for a minute there. And now I'm very upset that I can't continue that. This is a tantra again. This is something that if you run away from it your whole life, it's going to hit you someday and it's going to be painful. That's why it's better to work it in consistently throughout your whole life, if you can, and experience it and enjoy it. Although most people's Rahu doesn't really come together healthily until they're starting at about 36, ending at about 43 especially. And it, so don't think it's a bad thing if you got Rahu and Ashlesha and if you haven't started dealing with this world. But enjoy it, be playful with it, and don't get attached to anything that happens there, because it's likely the case that you can still have a partner, have some love, have a little bit of that magnetism. It'll never be satisfying, but when you look back in the rearview mirror, it's probably there was more of this Ashlesha embrace than there would be for most people. You've probably had the experience and it was actually good. It's just like drinking alcohol. Alcohol can be a nice thing to do once in a while. But if you get the taste for it and you want more of it, it's an abyss that is endless. And you could drink and drink and drink and you'll never really be satisfied by it. When all in reality, 3 drinks was actually all you really needed to get that hit. So you don't need to ignore it completely, but it's still good to engage with it. IC has mentioned that it's in the 10th house, so a lot of this might relate to your career. Having an attractive career. You're probably Scorpio rising if you've got Leo in the 10th house. And furthermore, having Venus there, it's going to be wrapped up in all of this. So each person's different things going on in Ashlesha. You'd have to read the whole chart to really define it. But this is a good start of what Ashlesha is all about. It'd be different with Ketu. Shucks, we could even talk about it while we're here and talking about Rahu. But I'm going to try... We should keep on going with our reading before we start getting too in-depth into planet interpretation. I even probably went into that a little too early. But we're flowing here, folks. So when we get into planetary interpretations, maybe we'll go through Ketu. Somebody do me a favor and remind me, if you could, please. But I'll probably remember. So let's keep it going here, folks. We are talking about the embrace of the serpents who need Parastad, the embrace of the serpents. In order for the embrace of the serpents to happen, there needs to be enchanting attractions and seductions. Only then will be the experience of enchanting dances. The embrace of the serpents needs to seduce serpents in order to put them in enchanted dances. This comes from Vic Dicara's website. He's got a Nakshatras course on his website, which I highly recommend. That's where this blue thing is coming from. Now, in his actual book, which we're about to read, we read, the embracing serpents need seduction for arousal. That's such a good way to put it. Vic always boils it down in the best way. Arousal is an internal experience. So the embrace of the serpents, really for all humans, this just goes to show that the true power of seduction is one's own, I should say it this way, the true power of one's own arousal, to get the deepest arousal experience that you can get, comes from some experience of seduction, especially of another person. Truly, the deepest arousal comes from within you. These almost kind of create each other. Seduction and arousal are like a carousel. Especially in Tantra, your own arousal is the musk. It's the smell that you emit in order to attract a partner. Everybody gets most attracted when we are in a mutual embrace. And there's something very self-turning on about being seductive and playing the game of seducing another person. And all of that, that's really a deep place of personal arousal that we can all get to. That's what's so tricky about Ashlesha. It's very, it seems obvious to all of us. If we cut the crap and just go down to like being 30 years old at a club. Everybody knows that you're turned on the most when you are turning on another person. Let's just cut the crap and just say that. Now, that's a deadly thing because that puts the power of your arousal in a situation. Whereas really, Tantra teaches us that we should be able to bring our own arousal from within ourselves. And that's true. But this is the tricky part of Tantra, is that it's a material, it embraces material, it embraces other people. So having other people involved in your arousal and your erotic power is powerful and it's arousing. It's a tricky thing to talk about, but this is why we're here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, before we read, this has already been a long episode, but it makes sense. It's my ascendant. So there's a page, there's a little bit that I want to give a bit of background on before we move into some planetary interpretations. Essentially, Vic Dicara's book, Nakshatra, The Authentic Heart of Vedic Astrology, he has a section of his book where he essentially talks about this true story of the nakshatra gods. I have this on my channel if you want to read through it, and it talks about how Indra, in the form of Jesta, there's the Vedic stories are just all very, 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 very old. And, the first one is Varuna, the god of the oceans, has to kill the dragon, which I believe is called Vritra. The dragon Vritra, the original Asura Nakshatra, the original Asura, the original dragon, the original Naga. Vritra became enamored with Apas, which is the water, which is the beauty. So Vritra takes all the water, all the beauty. And this is like just the world being very dry. Like the world before, all spirituality. It was a very survivalistic pursuit. Now Indra comes along. Really, Varuna kills the dragon Vritra with the help of all the gods, which is the internal chakras, the internal energies of the devas. Indra comes along and gets jealous of Varuna's position, and Varuna just gives it to him, basically. All right, Indra, you can have the throne. And then Indra says, yes, awesome, I am the best, because that's what Indra does. That's for the nakshatra Jesta, which is my moon. So Indra takes the spot of power, and the first thing that he does as Indra, as the king, as the god, is he points his finger. Well, first he ousts Varuna and tells him to be the husband of the rivers, of the waters of Apas, to pay for essentially not being as quick to the whip of protecting everybody as you should have been. The dragon Vritra almost won because Varuna didn't jump on it right away. But Indra just manipulated that whole thing. Even though Varuna did a good job, Indra is a political person who took it and said, hey, everybody, I would have done that quicker. So everyone's like, sure. Then Indra points the finger at all the dragons and says, you guys do not have a place in paradise anymore. Paradise was the realm of the devas. And this is a time when the devas and the asuras were all one. Indra came along and made it so that the asuras were separated from the devas. There's something very psychedelic going on in this story. I'm just going to crack into it pretty quickly because we've only got so much time. Indra represents the Indriyas. It represents the human form. Before the human form, we are in the perfect bliss of God, but we are incarnated as humans, and there's a reason for it. Because humans are in the experience of duality, of material. It's essentially a game, a play, where we have to prove ourselves that we can endure the weight of the devas, of goodness, of holiness, of truth. It's like, when God kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden. He could have just made them robots with no will, but instead God gave them free will. Indra is a part of that story. It's the Indian version of that story, where Indra is free will. That's why Indra is such a crazy bad character. He's such a he's so power hungry, because he is the free will of humanity. And Indra is actually the hero of the Vedas in so many ways, but he has to get the sense knocked out of him constantly in order to humble himself before the devas, which is what he's ultimately, that's the true power that Indra, our individual egos, are trying to go for. Part of the unfolding of Indra having to struggle to become divine, of humanity having to struggle to become divine, is splitting apart into the divine above and the asuras below. The asuras are the subconscious, and this is essentially what is kind of happening here with this part of the story. Vic gives a great little section of an alternate paradise. It's the Ashleshas and the Naga. And again, you can read this on my channel for the full thing. But essentially, the dragons rose ferociously against Indra. Indra turned upon the dragons and banished them from paradise. So they hate Indra for this. They hate the free will of Indra, and the dragons are always trying to steal Indra's free will. This is the subconscious of the asuras, trying to grab the free will of the ego and bring it down. Not necessarily for bad all the time. They buried into the earth with the help of the great architect and builder Maya. They created a second space, a second paradise below the earthly realm, a subterranean paradise, out of sight of the sun and the gods, whom they would forever resent and oppose. A whole bunch of other powerful asuras defected from Indra's kingdom and went to this alternative paradise to fight against Indra. So this subterranean world is nothing at all like hell or Hades. This is a place of grandeur and pleasure, not punishment or lament. It's more beautiful than the celestial paradise. The celestial paradise is perfect. It has the perfect amount of beauty. This has a little extra beauty, which is not necessarily perfect, but this is what this is for. It's like the devas can experience some of the subterranean beauty in waves of dharma, in little bits of dharma. But just like anything, when you have a partner that you like to have sex with, they are at some level this subterranean beauty. And you can enjoy having sex with them, as long as that doesn't stop you from doing your dharma. Right? The subterranean paradise is more beautiful than the celestial paradise. It's full of radiant jewels, exotic groves and lakes, and breathtaking serpentine maidens, eager to enjoy their uncommon health and beauty and vitality. Without the sun to mark time, the subterranean paradise has exceptional freedom from fatigue, aging, and disease. The light here radiates with phosphorescence from the radiant jewels worn in the crowns on the residents of the serpents. Now, since they dwell below the earthly plane, they're associated with subconscious forces. This is the key. This is the whole reason why I wanted to read this. Like lava, which flows within the earth, the Naga are associated with the internal power generators in organic bodies, the chakras, especially the deepest and lowest chakras, which, like dragons, are sexual and mystical in nature. This is Ashlesha, this is the Naga. The dragons are materialistic, fascinated by wealth and pleasure, but their approach to enjoying and acquiring these things is through exercise of mind-boggling magic powers, the mystic siddhis. If the dragons perform some yogic discipline, it's only ever for the sake. It's rajasic, essentially, strengthening their ability to enjoy the superior pleasures of this world. There's no species who has better mastery over the arts of pleasure and enjoyment. So this is yoga. You know, if anybody knows what I'm all about, like I love to do psychedelics and to do yoga and to do yogic disciplines where I'm holding my breath. You know, you bring your breath, you squeeze your perineum, bring your breath into the crown of your head, hold it, and then you let it go, and you imagine the air is coming back down through your all of 6 of your chakras. To do this while on psychedelics, where your mind is being pulled in different ways, you bring it all into this one point, and then the body is delicious. Then the sexual exploits have more energy, more space, more prana, more air. Hiking and just talking and philosophizing and all these things is just very much a thing that I love to do. And it's rajasic. All these things are rajasic, which doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. To use this capacity sattvically would be to continue doing your dharma. Like me, I talk about psychedelics and going for hikes and all this stuff I love to do. But I still love to come down and practice my Kriya Yoga, to do something like this for my audience where I'm using discipline to teach important Vedic scriptures. And the energy that I get through yoga and all the things I do helps that. It helps me enjoy it. It gives me the passion that I love to have. So I like to say that I'm doing it for positive reasons. And this is me leaning into the fact that it can be done in such a way. Because the essential nature of Ashlesha is a rajasic ploy at imbibing vitality, pleasure, and the energy of ecstasy and enjoyment. This can be, for its own sake, it's purely rajasic and can be a bit masturbatory and indulgent. But when used as a vessel, it can be applied as a vessel for the divine purposes of dharma, so long as the tail doesn't wag the dog. You know what I'm saying? Julia Ludens has made an interesting point. I think it's cool. Taylor Swift, in her sidereal chart, has her MC in Leo in Ashlesha. I would say if her sidereal... Remember, the nakshatras are a sidereal phenomenon. So if it's regarded that Taylor Swift has her MC in Ashlesha, it's going to be that whether you're a tropical person or a sidereal person. And I could definitely see her having her MC in Ashlesha. She has that serpentine beauty. I think she's beautiful, man. She's one of the most beautiful people I've seen in my personal vision and understanding. So, the gate that corresponds to Ashlesha in human design is gate 9, known as the taming power of the small. Is that right? IC is noted that the gate that corresponds to Ashlesha in human design is gate 9, known as the taming power of the small. Very interesting. I could definitely see Taylor Swift's MC being an Ashlesha because her whole career has this Ashlesha-like quality to it. Very, very interesting indeed. So, I wanted to bring on that little extra bit of consciousness. I think it's useful for the context of Ashlesha. Now, let us now move forward to describing Ashlesha in Vic Dicara's words in a way that is going to give us a little bit more practical understanding of what Ashlesha means for all of us, and in particular what Ashlesha means for those who have planetary and cusp and other important placements in Ashlesha. Oops. So we call this Ashlesha, the embracing serpents. And again, maybe we can just have one last little read from our Taittiriya Brahmana Sutra. It's right here. Sarpanam Ashlesha Abhyagachantaha Parastad Abhyanrityanto Vastat. And as Vic has, as we've already read, his condensation in this book, which is this is a more recent condensation than this other one we showed. This blue one was an older version of how Vic would boil this down. So this is the newer version. He says, the embracing serpents need seduction for arousal. Sarpanam is of the Nagas, the supernatural serpents. The word Sarpana means serpents, and it refers to the Naga. These are supernatural dragon snakes of the underworld paradise. So the entire sutra has a snake-oriented theme, evoking a sense of hypnotic dance and mysterious seduction. Now, Ashlesha, this word, and you'll notice, by the way, I'm going to say this here just for the heck of it. Notice how we have an R for Ashlesha. What Vic tells us is that the sutra, he gives us a little footnote. And the footnote says, the sutra itself uses R, Ashlesha, instead of L, Ashlesha. R and L are phonetic neighbors, and so they're thus somewhat difficult to distinguish, especially in days when there was little writing and it was more about listening. The old form may have been Ashlesha and over time morphed into Ashlesha through common pronunciation changes, or perhaps pronunciation was variable in olden times and it just became standardized as Ashlesha in modern times. The word Ashlesha literally means embrace, and it's usually used in romantic and sexual context. Serpents tend to coil. The ideal of serpents coiling around each other is embedded deep within human imagination. Entwined, embracing serpents, Sarpanam Ashlesha, are a mystical symbol found in many ancient cultures. Naga serpents are associated with subterranean paradisiac pleasures. Hence, even in the Middle East, Satan is depicted as a serpent associated with taboo pleasures, acts, and technologies. Hence, we find this sutra to describe the nakshatra in a very sensual, sexual, and passionate manner. I almost think of it as it's not, it's one of the tools in divinity's tool belt, or else it wouldn't be a nakshatra. This is one of the tools. If God was Batman, he's got this one little trick. It's carousel reversal spray, anti-shark repellent, whatever those old shows used to have there, This is one of the things that he has in his tool belt. And you don't want to use it all the time. You don't want to be lascivious about it. But God has this in his tool belt for a reason. So, if you use some kind of like lullaby grenade that makes sleeping gas and can make a whole room fall asleep, that's not always going to be a good thing for Batman to use. But he still has it for a reason. It's the same thing with what is described as the satanic, sensual, erotic, and passionate pleasures and manners of the Naga. It can be a bad thing if used lasciviously, but it's there for a reason. It's one of the 27 nakshatras, right? Now let's dig into the word abhyagachantaha. The root of this very long word is the very simple root word ga, which is akin to the English word go. So that's the ga chantaha. The root ga becomes the stem gacha, to which the sutra adds the a prefix, so it's agacha. And this changes the meaning from going, ga is like going, and even gacha is kind of like going. So agacha would mean coming to something. So then it uses a second prefix, abhi, and that's a prefix, right? So agacha is coming. Now abhi changes the meaning from coming to pulling in the sense of attracting or seducing. So it's a very, again, this is why it's a pretty different breakdown from what Ernst gave us. So gacha is kind of like going, agacha is coming, and then so abhyagacha is kind of like pulling, is pulling and drawing something. The ability to embrace, that being Ashlesha, the ability to embrace depends on the ability to attract lovers. Abhyagachantaha parastat. The embrace of the serpents needs the ability to attract lovers. Now the word is in plural form, suggesting that Ashlesha wants to attract many people, or that it constantly wants to attract. It's like many attractions. It wants to experience many attractions coming from itself. And this is the serpentine nature of attraction. At this point, I'd like to mention, Timothy Leary is a guy from the psychedelic 60s and 70s. And he's known for a lot of things, but what he's less known for, in my opinion, is a really strong philosophical background that involves Tantra as well as many spiritual things. And one of his great phrases that I've always thought was very important is aesthetic erotic choice is the key strategy of evolution. That's something that Timothy Leary said, which I've always really thought was amazing. Maybe it's because I'm a Ashlesha. And this relates to what we're talking about here. I'll say it again. Aesthetic erotic choice is the key strategy of evolution. Aesthetic. Everybody knows if you're wearing like a blue shirt, there's going to be certain colors that go well with that aesthetically. If you're wearing a blue shirt and black pants, if you throw in let's say those black pants have little like blue highlights or even yellow highlights, for you to throw in something that's like red or like brown in there or something, it's going to aesthetically mess with the background. There's an aesthetic foreground and aesthetic background. So people can tell when something works aesthetically or not. The colors blue and orange. If you've ever seen a sky at night on a sunset, it turns into blue, mauve, and orange. And those are all colors that work really nicely together. They're opposites on the color spectrum, blue and orange. So they have an aesthetic that just people naturally sense. There are some things that look good and some things that don't look good. If that wasn't the case, there wouldn't be a fashion industry. Some things look better together than other things. We call this aesthetic. Why is it? Why is it that one thing looks better than another? Sometimes it's subjective, but again, There's a whole industry built on this. Sometimes it's just a fact. Certain things look better together than others. Now, if we're talking about aesthetic erotic choice, it means that we have a choice. We have something inside us that just feels like the other person just vibes better for us. I just don't know why. The way this lady holds her teacup when she sips it and she sticks her lips out the way she does, it makes me grind my teeth, and I don't know why. I don't know why she's so much more beautiful to me than somebody else. I don't know why. This is what we call aesthetic erotic choice. It's unconscious. It's in the DNA. And the way one lady holds her teacup might be attractive to one person in a way that's not attractive to another person. That is very subjective, but it has internal laws within each person's soul. So Ashlesha wants to, the embrace of the serpents is abhyagachantaha, and this is this many pullings, many attractions, feeling the sense that you know how to pull on the other person's, that the other person has an aesthetic choice that you match. That's what I'm trying to say. The other person has an aesthetic erotic choice which you match. Just by being what you are, the other person is livened up by it. And of course, now we're going to explain the other side, which is you have an aesthetic erotic choice that you want the other person to hit. You have a desire that you want the other person to do, to match. And this is the self-ecstasy. The first bit is I want to hit that person's aesthetic erotic choice. Abhyagachantaha. Now, abhyarityanta, or abhyaricyantaha, is I want you to hit my button. I want you to hit my aesthetic erotic choice. I want you to hold the coffee cup in a way that turns me on. So again, the core, now let's start looking at abhyaricyantaha. Again, the core of this very long word is a simple short root, and that's nritya. N-R.T-Y-A. So nritya means expression of joy, and most often refers to dancing in ancient Sanskrit. It's interesting that dancing is correlated with the same thing, which is an expression of joy. It's like, what are people doing when they're dancing? You know, the happy dance, the food dance. Have anybody seen someone do that when they're starving and then they get to eat and they're like, oh, the happy dance. That's an expression of joy. They just do it without thinking. So that's nritya, an expression of joy, referred to as dancing. Now the A prefix conveys an evocation of joy, denoting stimulation and arousal. Anritya, right? So anritya is, nritya is like an expression of joy. Anritya is an internal conveyance of joy. It's coming from me. So when we add to this the prefix abhi, this indicates that the arousal, abhi means, I guess Vic doesn't give it to us in the strictest sense. But when we add the prefix abhi to anritya, we get a word which indicates that the arousal is very powerful and compelling, like passionate intercourse. Abhyanrityanta. And again, the word is plural, suggesting abundant and constant passion. So again, what we have is two people who are feeling like they're hitting each other's genetically gesticulated hot buttons, right? So clearly this nakshatra is all about intense mystical passion. Ashlesha wants to attract people abhyagachantaha, so that they can embrace Ashlesha, entwining like coiled serpents to enjoy the enthralling passions of intimate intercourse. Abhyanrityanta. So I'm going to say all this again. Ashlesha Nakshatra wants to attract people so that they can embrace, entwining like coiled serpents to enjoy the enthralling passions of intimate intercourse between the two people. And that could be two people, two businesses, or the people involved in two businesses. It often would probably happen where, a powerful woman with a business and a powerful man with a business can erotically trade goods or, make connections for the employees and stuff. And it's almost an erotic secondary outlet of the vibes that they have between each other. So let's start getting into now the interpretive. And I'm remembering now in my brain that we should say a word about Ketu here now. But yeah, we're looking at the interpretive dimensions of Ashlesha Nakshatra, having cusps, important cusps or planets or shadow grahas falling into the nakshatra of Ashlesha. Ashlesha is eagerly welcome wherever intense passion, seduction, and alluring mystery is called for, such as in the bedroom, between lovers, and even towards difficult but treasured goals. However, it's unwelcome where dispassion and objective detachment are called for. We're going to mention how Saturn and the Sun, Vic particularly describes those two planets as not being good here. We can understand it because when it comes to the Sun, there's one thing that you can't compromise on. There's one thing that you can't bend or shift in order to do anything, and that's your dharma, that's your spiritual purpose and identity, your kingdom. When a king has his kingdom, he can't sell his kingdom upriver in order for some short little business prospect that's going to give him short-term pleasure or money, but will ultimately sell his kingdom upriver to the enemy. When the Sun is in Ashlesha, it can do those kinds of things, and Saturn is the same way. Saturn is our boundary of our absolute limits, of what we know is good for our personal boundaries and limitations. Saturn knows when to say no when it's healthy. So when Saturn, especially in our day and age, Ashlesha falls in Leo. So the Sun is not so bad being in Leo and Ashlesha. There will be times where the Sun is challenged in Ashlesha because it's in Leo and it's very interested in having its own kingdom. But someone will come along and say, you could damage your kingdom a little bit. If you come and help me, you help focus on this thing with me, because I'm very powerful, I'm very seductive, and everybody loves me, and you love me. I know you do. I hold my teacup in the way that turns you on. So why don't you come over here and give me a little bit of your investment and energy. It might hurt your kingdom a little bit, but you will enjoy it in the long run. Someone with the Sun in Leo and Ashlesha has to be careful in moments like this. Sometimes, not to say it's always going to be a bad thing, but you have to be mindful of when you are undermining your own integrity, your kingdom, your dharma, your truth, because of the enchantment of somebody when the Sun is in this place. But it's especially with Saturn. Saturn in Leo and Ashlesha is essentially someone's going to come along and say, hey, you don't need to work so hard. You've made promises that you would keep to the people around you, but how much do they really love you? They're not as attractive as me in my world, in my business, my community, my group. So if you really want to be a king, why don't you come be a king in a place where you'll be respected for your work and you don't have to work as hard. You won't even have to lift a finger because I'm going to have people making sure that you're taken care of. Essentially that would soften up the Saturn in Leo. The Saturn in Leo wants to feel like it's a king, so it wants to feel like it's got a high status, because that's how Saturn protects itself when it's in Leo, which is why Saturn in Leo doesn't usually work very well. The Sun and Saturn are enemies. So when the Saturn is in Leo and in Ashlesha, there's real danger here for the person letting go of the things they've built up their whole life, for example. You could have built up your whole life to be in, let's say, like the union, and you're going to get a pension and all that good stuff. But someone came along and said, hey, come make a business with me and be my business partner, and forget all that safe way of being. And, don't worry, your future's going to be fine. You've been working hard for your kids and your family, and you're so tired. Why don't you come work with me instead? And they could throw all that away for the attraction that they think will give them more security, Saturn, but could actually end up weaseling them in the long run. So that's why Saturn especially has to be careful in Ashlesha in Leo. Dispassionate planets like the Sun, and especially Saturn, indicate difficulty in sexuality, romantic relationships, and passions. And even a possibility is frigidity and insensitivity to such things. It's almost like, because the Sun and Saturn in Ashlesha, they might feel... Shucks. I can tell my computer screen just froze a little bit. Hopefully my timing is not off on my voice now. That would be annoying, but whatever. Let me know if my audio is off from my video tracking, folks. It happens. So someone with the Sun and Saturn can get frigid and insensitive when it comes to the subtleties of sexuality and romance. It's part of the reason why they can be taken advantage of, because they're so rigid when it comes to sexuality. Saturn and Sun are such focused, rigid energies that they have a hard time being natural, going with the flow, and being soft and erotic. So when someone comes along who is soft and erotic, they can be easily manipulated by such a person. The other possibility for the Sun and Saturn in Ashlesha is being embroiled in debilitating and jealous manipulation, and excessive worry about being attractive and charming, excessively desiring and worrying that they're not attractive enough. And it's like they take it personally. It feels to them like, I'm never going to be this beautiful, attractive person. It's because I'm a piece of shit. That's the kind of energy that can come through there, So that's why Ashlesha can be unwelcome, where dispassion and objective detachment are called for. When Ashlesha is functioning well, it indicates an excellent sex life, powerful charisma, and an ability to exist in the mysterious realm of magic, charm, and mystery. Passionate planets here tend to be exciting and positive. For example, Venus and Mars in Ashlesha indicate a very strong libido and a very attractive and charismatic nature. The moon as well, especially because the moon has the sun for a friend. The ascendant lord or the ascendant in Ashlesha can bring this kind of strength, this libidinal attractiveness. Any important trine or angular cusps prominently placed here can bring out some of this as well. Excuse me. As we heard from Taylor Swift, possibly, as someone has mentioned, that Taylor Swift could have her MC, her 10th house cusp in Ashlesha. So, especially when it comes to the ascendant, if there's positive angles to the ascendant, or if the ascendant lord is strong, then the ascendant will have the positive, exciting, magnetic quality of Ashlesha. Jupiter and Mercury here are fairly neutral. They both have Leo for a friend, which is helpful. But mind you, you'll notice that Vic Dicara is not assuming that Ashlesha is in Leo. He's talking about purely what it's like to have these planets in Ashlesha as its own thing, which is very useful for us. Jupiter and Mercury here are fairly neutral in Ashlesha, and they indicate good knowledge of dance, romantic arts, and beauty from a sort of philosophical perspective. Now, Rahu and Ketu, Vic has described those as being rather quite overwhelming here. It's usually indicating a chance of being overpowered by attachments with addictive tendencies. In the case of Rahu, we've already talked about it earlier in the episode. And with Ketu, it's essentially going to be opposite. This is Ketu in Ashlesha in Leo is somebody who has gotten very used to, through their past lives, they've become very enamored by and very identified with being an attractive personality. They've always gotten it around that way, especially when they were younger, because youth disappears. This is somebody who really has to be careful once they get to be like 40 years old. As youth dwindles, they are going to realize that they've always had luck from the beauty and youth that they've had when they were younger. And if they didn't take advantage of that in the best way to solidify themselves, to gain money, to gain material providence, to gain love, true family love that's going to last, that's more than just skin deep and aesthetic erotic choice deep. If you've been building things outside of your ability to have embracing attractions, then when you get to be about 40 years old, you will have used that in intelligent ways to solidify yourself for the rest of your life. You'll still probably be flattered easily, but you will allow your youth to fall off like the leaves of a tree have to fall off of a tree in order for spring to come next year in the next incarnation. If you have Ketu in Leo in Ashlesha and there's things going on there that would indicate affliction and difficulty, then the thought of losing youth, the thought of missing a note erotically, the thought of not attracting the person that you wanted to attract is going to cripple your basic foundational personality. If you've got a strong sun, then that'll likely be helped out. If you've got things related to Ketu, you've got a strong Mars, which helps Ketu. These are the kind of things that will help you get through those things so it's not ultimately deleterious and damaging to you, because you can't win them all. Believe me, you can't win them all. You can't attract everyone. You can't land it right all the time. And you can't be attractive forever. You can't be a Ashlesha forever. You can't lean into that for your whole life. And there's times where that's not even useful, where you'll be seen, especially in spirituality. If you're wanting to be regarded as a person, I've got to be careful of this in my own way, where I can't use my youthful, my charmingness or whatever as I get older and I become more serious about the depths of my craft, of astrology, of spirituality, of yoga. All of, the appearance and the way of doing this attraction thing is going to be secondary. And if it's not secondary, then you're going to have trouble. If you have any placements in Ashlesha that you're leaning on, that's the ascendant, and that's Ketu, especially Ketu in Ashlesha. Ketu in Ashlesha has to have, it's again, don't let the tail wag the dog. Don't let your ability to gain attraction overtake the thing that you're attracting for, which is ideally some positive prospect that you've built on, some constructive good, some kind of business prospect, some kind of thing you're doing for the world that your attraction can help be a vessel for bringing attention to. But if all you've got is attention for its own sake, you are going to get soiled hard as you grow older. I'm saying this also to myself. that was cool. Overall, Vic Dicara gives us a life lesson. This is us sort of understanding what Ashlesha is all about. This sutra, on the whole, addresses the following question. Is it possible to be seductive without being an evil serpent? The clue is in the root meaning of the root word of abhyanrita. That root word is nritya, which means expression of joy. Commonly, it means dance. And we must remember that most people love to dance. Most people love to express their joy. Everyone wants to be involved in an expression of joy. And that's not an evil thing at all. So, the goal of Ashlesha is not inherently selfish, evil, or bad. The goal is to engage people in things that will make them happy and joyful. If we can seduce and charm people into doing things that they will enjoy and benefit from, we use the serpentine power of Ashlesha in a morally progressive way. That's my boy Vic Dicara right there. A real hero of mine. That's just, even for my whole life, this is a very life-affirming. I'm going to say it again. If we can seduce and charm people into doing things that they will enjoy and benefit from, we use the serpentine power of Ashlesha in a morally progressive way. Now, he gives us a little footnote here. If you study the nature of Krishna carefully, you will see that the Vedic concept of divinity revolves around nritya, dancing, expressions of joy, expressions of ecstasy, and that Krishna is the object of perfected seduction, which delights him infinitely. Thus, there is no grounds for demonization of sexuality, seduction, and mastery of the arts of flirtation. This demonization is a byproduct of Vedic culture being thoroughly cross-contaminated by Islamic and Christian and Abrahamic concepts. But Krishna is the object of perfected seduction, which delights him infinitely. And thus, we see that the Vedic concept of divinity revolves around nritya, dancing and expressions of joy. It's so deep to me, to myself, to what I am. It makes me really want to tell everybody that, pay attention to where your ascendant falls in the nakshatras. Because what I just read is just so it for my whole beingness and existence. Now, Vic Dicara also gives us a little supplication. It's a little something that he's written as almost like a prayer to the energies of the nakshatras that we're reading about at present. Vic says, respect and adore these serpents who come in Ashlesha. They dwell in the inner, mysterious center of our solid, tangible world. May they come to accept our offerings. These serpents in the sky outshine even the sun. May our desires and embraces be just like theirs. We offer honey to them. Vic gives us a footnote on the phrase that these serpents dwell in the inner mysterious center of our solid tangible world. And Vic tells us that this shows that these serpents, the serpentine energy of the asuras, are concerned with material things, but they have a mystical, deep, magical approach to acquiring, controlling, and enjoying them. And the purposes are ultimately, in the greater picture, connected with the larger agenda of the devas and divinity in the Vedic world. These creatures are a part of that divinity, and their purposes are ultimately for that divinity, which is nritya, expressions of joy. So beautiful. So that was the big picture there with Ashlesha, folks. So we have one more reading to go here, folks. One reading left before we call her a day here. And this would be our reading describing the Ashlesha native. And for all those watching, it's important to remember that when we read about the Ashlesha native, this is coming again from the author Radhe, who is a sidereal practitioner, which can make the things in this section a little bit dicey. There might be things we read that go against what we've read, as, you know, remember we've talked about how sidereal traditional Jyotishis and practitioners of Vedic astrology might do a bit of distortion if you are a tropical astrologer like me. There's been distortions of authors who believe that there are intrinsic qualities of the nakshatra related to the sign that it's in. In this case, it's bound to be Leo either way, I believe. I'm pretty sure that the sidereal people also have Ashlesha. Oh, it might actually be in Cancer. Yeah. So Ashlesha really takes on a lot of the quality of Cancer for this reading. So this is why we have to, that's why we did the first part of this video, which is being mindful of the distortions possible when we talk about the character quality of Ashlesha. However, it's still useful for us to see what the old idea of Ashlesha is. We've just got to be discerning. We've got to separate the wheat from the chaff, because this author often does still have a pretty cool and interesting depiction of the character qualities of the nakshatras that she talks about. And this can be essentially for anybody with lots of planets. Oh, excuse me. With lots of planets in a nakshatra, with an ascendant in a nakshatra, even with any important angular trine in this nakshatra. The ascendant lord in this nakshatra will be relevant as well, but especially the moon. When you have the moon in Ashlesha, this is going to be the character quality that you can expect from the Ashlesha native. The moon is the most connected. It's the lunar mansions, right? The nakshatras are the mansions of the moon. So if the moon is in Ashlesha, this will be very telltale and descriptive of the character qualities of that person. So now this is the native, the Ashlesha native. What are they like? Many of the native's personality characteristics are garnered from the nature and symbolism of snakes. The snake's shedding of skin is indicative of initiation, as well as transformation and rebirth. While shedding its skin, the snake undergoes a period in which its eyes cloud over and its sight is severely hindered. This necessitates hibernation in a safe place for several days. Once the skin is shed, his eyes become clear, allowing the snake to see the world distinctly again. True to the serpent nature of this nakshatra, the native undergoes major transformations in life, each time seeing the world and its truths more clearly. Yeah, I can really relate to that. Symbolic of the Kundalini energy, snakes suggest seductive and powerful sexual energy. Perhaps the native is drawn to spiritual practices focused on the awakening of the Kundalini. He may also be a sex therapist, or a sexual education teacher, or even perhaps a professional hypnotist or a snake charmer. And if not a hypnotist, then perhaps the native has hypnotic-like eyes. For similar qualities are found in snakes who, lacking eyelids, possess an unblinking, hypnotic type of stare. Depending on the tenure of the chart, the Ashlesha native may be particularly adept in the art of seduction, which leverages their ability to captivate and charm others through sensual allure. Alternatively, they may be the victim to such crafty practices as well. Now, we can take, for example, Marilyn Monroe, who, according to the author, has Ashlesha lagna, so her ascendant must be around the same place as mine. My ascendant is around 13 degrees Leo. Tropical. Marilyn Monroe reports being sexually assaulted from an early age while living in various foster homes. In her early 20s, Monroe began her career as a model, which eventually presented opportunities for her in the film industry. As an actress, she was soon quickly typecast as the seductive dumb blonde. She went on to become the world's biggest sex symbol ever. Happens to have a Ashlesha Nakshatra on her lagna. Very interesting. Now, snakes also symbolize ancient mystical knowledge and the hidden subconscious. Such aspects support an interest in psychology, the occult, and all things mystical. Healing fields addressing deep mental and emotional disorders, mental instability, neurosis, hysteria, manic depressive tendencies, systemic hallucinations, etc., or past life trauma. These are all supported by Ashlesha. So these are healing fields that address these mental issues. Likewise, the native may be drawn to modalities requiring the application of poisons, dangerous substances, or even untested drugs. This includes chemotherapy, radiation, and experimental drugs, as well as psychedelics in my case. It's very interesting to read this. As with each nakshatra, a murkier side surfaces, given the right chart conditions and the appropriate planets. By observing the conduct of snakes, we are afforded a glimpse into possible behavior of this darker side. When surprised, certain snakes abruptly rise up and strike with a death-inflicting bite. Similarly, there can be a strong defensive nature in this native. Untrusting and always alert. The native is ready to pounce when a threat is perceived. If caught off guard, he operates on a strike first, ask questions later basis. The method of victimization employed by particular snakes is a methodical strangulation. Slowly circling its victim, the snake tightens its squeeze every time its victim inhales. Interestingly, Ashlesha translates as the embracer, and its symbol is a closed circle or a wheel. That comes from Muhurta Chintamani, page 87. So enemies or competitors of the native may receive similar calculating and shrewd, slowly squeezing the life out of the person types of treatment. In the Puranic literature, Sarpas are particularly adept at shape-shifting, which they do either to protect the gods or to manipulate others for personal gain. Hidden agendas, craftiness, and frequent use of disguises are other potential aspects of an afflicted Ashlesha. The native's chart must be carefully analyzed in order to distinguish between a deadly venomous snake and the rather charming and useful garden snake. Of course, it always depends on the chart to see how any nakshatra qualities are going to ultimately play out. Now, finally, just as the various defense methods inherent in a snake, such as rattling its tail, hissing, flicking its tongue, etc., alerts its unsuspecting victim, the native may develop mechanisms such as a nervous laugh, a hypnotic stare, or the display of defensive body language. Despite the potential adverse consequences of Ashlesha, the fact remains that under supportive chart conditions, this nakshatra can produce great healers, therapists, shamans, and mystics. A perfect example of the many positive aspects of Ashlesha is seen in the life and accomplishments of Mahatma Gandhi, whose moon was in Ashlesha, according to Astro Databank. Gandhi became one of the most influential and powerful individuals in India. Best known for his principle of satyagraha, which is passive resistance, Gandhi was instrumental in India's independence, and he didn't do it through any overt war. He did it by slowly squeezing the British Raj with the forces of his people. Sick. Dope. A quiet and shy man during his early years, Gandhi underwent a major personal transformation while in South Africa. Witnessing discrimination and victimization of Indians in this country, Gandhi became an impressive public activist who spent the rest of his life protesting against discrimination and manipulation of others. Eventually, Gandhi took the vow of brahmacharya, which is in part a vow of celibacy. There remains much controversy over Gandhi's carnal experiments as a brahmacharin. And indeed, his sexuality became a very public aspect of his life. I've heard examples that, Gandhi used to surround himself with beautiful young women, and he would sit and he would stay and retain a state of meditative composure and focus within as the temptations of the young women around him were there. And that was part of his whole shtick there. Interesting thing. In any case, that was our reading, ladies and gentlemen. We've just learned about the nature of Ashlesha, and a lot of it rings true to me. Again, I have Ashlesha lagna. My lagna falls in the sign of in the nakshatra of Ashlesha. So it's interesting. It's amazing the similarities I see there. We've talked a lot today, so I think that we're going to call her one now, folks. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Now, IC says that their Lagna Lord is in Ashlesha, and some of this resonates. I know Marilyn Monroe is often referred to when people describe Ashlesha women in terms of appearance. Right. She certainly is. And we'll get a good look at what Ashlesha looks like by taking a peek at Marilyn Monroe. So Marilyn Monroe is said to have some of this serpentine, snake-like sexual aura and energy because she has Ashlesha on her ascendant. It's very interesting to see and to get a glimpse of how her face looked and how she could use and have that sort of allure. I mean, this is very classic Marilyn Monroe, using her body, her looks, her sexuality, almost in an indirect way. I'd almost like to show that as one of the pictures, as a main picture of this energy. We talked about how Ashlesha has an indirect sort of energy, and this perfectly describes it. She's like, oh, excuse me, this wind coming up my skirt is just an accident, and it's showing her legs, but it seems to be very conscious of a decision in this sort of sense, right? She really has a drawn back sort of look to her. Like she's not necessarily, she's giving it away, but she looks cheeky. She looks wry. She looks like she's holding something back. She's got something special, and she knows that she has it, you know? Very interesting. That's a good picture of her. That energy is really there. So anyway, we could talk forever about it, but I'm glad I got to share at least a picture of old Marilyn. But like I said, folks, I'm Dustin Cormier. This has been How to Rock Astrology. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of... you know what? Thank you. IC is giving us some excellent examples of women who are known for having Ashlesha energy. And another one that we've just heard is that Megan Fox has this Ashlesha energy, this sort of sexual kind of serpentine looks to her. Now I know that she's done like a lot of face work, so it's kind of hard for us to define what the natural look would be like. I guess this is her before she got her facial stuff done, but this is the kind of the Megan Fox that I think of anyway. She's got that natural foxy serpentine kind of like look to her, right? Very cool to see it. She's got that classic hot chick look that a lot of people have. Thank you, IC, and thank you everybody else who's been watching and hanging out with us. I hope this was useful and fun and practical. I'm Dustin Cormier. This has been How to Rock Astrology. Keep your eyes out, folks, because I'm going to try and do this. I'm going to try to do this once a week if I can for the next coming bit, and hopefully we can get through all of our nakshatras. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed. Let me know what you thought. We'll always have more stuff coming through in my channel. So thanks for watching. Thanks everybody who was here for the live. Thank you, Susie. I love you. I love you, IC. Gunmetal Crow is here. It's nice to see my friends who are always hanging out with me. And I really appreciate that. Take care, everybody, and I'll hopefully see you next week.